Mr. President, we have come to a crisis in our country. My state of West Virginia has the highest drug overdose death rate in the nation. West Virginia reported 818 overdose drug deaths last year, four times the number that occurred in 2001, and a nearly 13% increase over 2015. We lost more than 700 West Virginians dying from an opiate overdose last year. 42,000 people in West Virginia, including 4,000 youth, sought treatment for illegal drug use but failed to receive it because of a lack of treatment centers that we've been trying to correct. In West Virginia, drug overdose deaths have soared by more than 700% since 1999. West Virginia had the highest rate of prescription drug overdose deaths of any state last year, 31 per 100,000 people. In West Virginia, providers wrote 138 painkiller prescriptions for every 100 people. Think about this, Mr. President. The doctors are prescribing, the manufacturers are producing, and they have written 138 painkiller prescriptions for every 100 people in my state, the highest rate in the country. And I'm hoping Arkansas is not facing the same dilemma that we are. Every day in our country, 91 Americans die from an opioid overdose. Opioids now kill more people than car accidents, and in 2015, the number of heroin deaths nationwide surpassed the number of deaths from gun homicides. Since 1999, we have lost almost 200,000 Americans to prescription drug opiate abuse. 2.1 million Americans abuse or are dependent on opiates. According to the CDC, 3 out of 4 new heroin users abuse prescription opiates before moving to heroin. Heroin use has more than doubled among young adults ages 18 to 25 in the past decade. 45% of the people who used heroin were also addicted to prescription opiate painkillers. Between 2009 and 2013, only 22% of Americans suffering from opiate addiction participated in any form of addiction treatment. Misuse and abuse of opioids cost the country an estimated $78.5 billion in 2013 in lost productivity, medical cost, and criminal justice cost. Mr. President, every week I come to the Senate floor to read letters from West Virginians and those struggling all throughout our country with opiate abuse. The reason I do this is because it's a silent killer. We don't talk about it. There's not one of us in the Senate, not one of us in Congress, not one of us in any gathering that doesn't know somebody in our immediate family, extended family, or a close friend that hasn't been affected. But we would never talk about it because it was so embarrassing that how did it ever break down in our family? Whether you had a model family or you thought you did, this is a killer. Whether you're a Democrat or Republican, whether you think you're conservative or liberal, this is a killer. It has no discretion. It has no partisan base, goes after one and the other. So this is what we're dealing with. The letters I read have a common theme. They will mention how hard it is to get themselves or loved ones into treatment. Sometimes it takes months and sometimes it never happens. This problem stems from our lack of a system to help those who are looking for help. We need permanent funding to create expanded substance abuse treatment facilities to help people get clean and stay clean. I know you've heard me say this before, but that's why I introduced the Lifeboat Act. Lifeboat basically puts 1 penny per milligram of opiates, basically 1 penny for every milligram of opiates produced in America, consumed in America, into a fund that pays for treatment centers. In your beautiful state of Alaska, my state of West Virginia, people need treatment. This is an illness. I used to look at it 20 years ago as it was basically a criminal act. And you know what? We put them in jail. Guess what? They came out of jail just as addicted as they went in. Nothing changed. So I'm willing to change. I've always said this: if you can't change your mind, you can't change anything. This is an illness that needs treatment, and we're responsible for that. The Lifeboat would establish a steady, sustainable funding stream to provide expanded access to substance abuse treatment. Let me just say, today I'm going to read a letter from parents from West Virginia who lost their son to drug abuse. This is my letter. This is Renee and Chris's letter that they want me to read. This fine-looking young man, he was a father, and this is such a tragic ending to this story. I'm writing to you, it says, Dear Senator Manchin, I'm writing to you in hope of bringing to light the devastating effects of heroin addiction, overdose deaths, and the difficult in finding treatment for those afflicted with the disease and their families. On November 12, 2016, we lost our 23-year-old son, Nick, who died from what we thought at the time was a heroin overdose. When Nick's autopsy report came back, we discovered that his body contained no trace of heroin in his system. He had died of a fatal dose of straight fentanyl. Straight dose of fentanyl. Nick was a quiet, kind, and inquisitive child. He learned to speak and read at an early age and spent much of his time absorbed in books and riding his bike and scooter. He also loved playing in the woods and dreaming up adventures with his sisters and neighborhood friends. He was a protective big brother, and he had a natural way of connecting with kids who were different and making them feel accepted. Nick was always tall for his age. He came into this world on July 5th, 1993, weighing at 10 pounds and topped off at 6'8". He loved sports and excelled in basketball and soccer. He even met you when you were Governor Manchin after his basketball team traveled to Charleston to celebrate their Class A basketball tournament championship in 2011. After high school, he went on to play basketball for Glenville State College Pioneers. Nick wasn't able to keep his grades up and had to drop out of Glenville after his first semester of school. Shortly after that, he met a girl. They instantly connected and soon became a father to her daughter. After several years together, they had a son of their own. After having difficulty holding down jobs and providing for his family, Nick came to me in November of 2015, and he told me that he was addicted to opiate prescription drugs. We had suspected drug use for quite some time, but didn't realize the extent of it. He said that he could no longer live the life he was leading and needed help. Nick and his girlfriend had started using opiate-based prescription drugs after she was prescribed them for her recovery from the birth of her daughter in 2013. At first, they would make trips to the doctor or quick care with fake ailments in order to get their prescriptions. If they couldn't get prescriptions, then they bought from drug dealers. The pills were easy to get up until the time he came to me for help. I told my husband about Nick's drug problem and not knowing what to do. We turned to the internet as a source of information. We found a lot of information in many treatment centers across the country. I began calling a few of the ones that looked reputable, but in each case, they required $3,000 to $5,000 up front for a 28 to 30-day treatment. 28 to 38-day treatment does not work, does not cure hardly anybody. The question now was, were these treatment centers as good as they appeared to be on their websites, or were they simply out to make a profit and marketing their centers to bring in more patients? While we researched and tried to make a decision, Nick, not wanting to be away from his family, went through detox at home and had convinced him and us that he could do this on his own. Nick made it through his first round of self-detox, but started using again for a short while at the end of January. We confronted him, and he immediately started his second round of self-detox. He again swore that he could do this himself and was finished with the life he was leading. We were still trying to figure out what to do with him and what would happen to his family while he was gone. We didn't know that his girlfriend was also using and detoxing along with Nick. After speaking to several people at a local treatment center and trying to arrange for him to be admitted, we were told that they wouldn't take him because our insurance. My next course of action was to call local counseling centers that offered addiction counseling, hoping that they would be able to offer advice. Each one I called politely told me that they really couldn't help him. Nick's addiction and our focus on him was taking away from our being able to celebrate and focus on our other children. Nick's two sisters. We decided to put Nick on the back burner while we prepared for our daughter's graduation party and the school events that preceded it, thinking that a few weeks wouldn't hurt. Boy, were we ever wrong. One of our daughters had learned that Nick could get treatment if we pressed charges against him for theft. This is the sad scenario, Mr. President, when a family has to hope that their child gets arrested and gets a conviction record so they can go to a drug court to get treatment. That's the only help they have. He would be charged, then court ordered to be sent to addiction treatment center. She felt that this was the best course of action to get Nick the help he needed. But Chris and I were hesitant because of the negative impact the felony charge would have on Nick's life if the charges weren't expunged after completing his treatment, which is our, what we call, Fresh Start or Last Chance bill, which you've been so graciously looking at, and hopefully you'll be a part of this. There's got to be a pathway forward. It's a shame they fall into this. Our decision not to go this route caused even more anger, since they knew that hindsight being 20/20 was the only way to get Nick help. Little did we know that by late March, early April, Nick and his girlfriend had decided to celebrate their being clean by using heroin, just this once as a reward for staying clean. They were rewarding themselves to using heroin because they had celebrated being clean. Now you understand that's not proper thinking. That's not rational common sense. In the past, the two had snorted heroin but had never injected it. When they went to buy from their dealer, he told them that since they didn't have much money and there were two of them, they could get a better high with less heroin if they injected it. And that was the beginning of a rapid decline. On June the 2nd, 2016, Nick had his first overdose. Without our knowledge, his girlfriend had taken Nick, along with the children, to the emergency room where he was treated and released within a few hours. Unbeknownst to us, this initiated a call to CPS that would result in her daughter's father taking custody of her and CPS's involvement for Nick and his girlfriend and their son. At the hospital, Nick and his girlfriend talked with a doctor out of Pittsburgh about Suboxone. They agreed to try the program. I traveled with Nick, his girlfriend, and her mother for the first visit to Pittsburgh. They had a high success rate, and it was decided that once a treatment was established, the two would go to Pittsburgh once a month for drug testing, counseling, and their Suboxone prescriptions. The clinic would line up additional support services in Parkersburg or close by. We were very impressed with the clinic, their staff, and the program, which only took on 100 patients at a time. Chris came to the next meeting 2 weeks later to speak with the counselors and was now more comfortable with the treatment plan. Unfortunately, when the counselors tried to set up local support services, they were shocked to find the small number of places that treated addiction and the fact that the ones that were here would not provide services for patients who were not in their program. The decision was made to increase their sessions to twice a month and eventually once a week, when it became apparent through consistent dirty screens that the two were struggling with the program and still using. In August, his girlfriend suffered an overdose. The Pittsburgh clinic called shortly after that and said they were releasing the two from the program, letting us know that they needed a more intense treatment plan than they could provide. I called the CPS caseworker and addiction counselor that were assigned to watch over the children and monitor the two after Nick's overdose in June. We all met at the house to determine the next course of action. After numerous phone calls, we were able to find an open bed in Las Vegas, Nevada for Nick, while his girlfriend would decide the following week to go to treatment center in Fairmont, West Virginia. In less than a week, Nick was on a plane to Vegas, eager to begin a new clean life. He was upbeat and positive before he left, excited by the prospect of finally leaving behind a life of addiction that he'd been living for so long. During his phone calls home, he had positive things to say about the treatment. He was staying in nice homes that were part of the treatment center. Along with their daily treatment schedule, they were taken on hikes and went go-kart racing. He even had a manicure at the facility's salon. The purpose of these facilities or activities was to teach the patients natural ways of experiencing highs, another high of life. Nick's release date was scheduled October the 3rd. There were longer-term treatment plans offered at the facility, but Nick missed his son and worried about his girlfriend and wanted to come home. The treatment center had set up group sessions for him 3 times a week for a period of about 6 weeks. Nick came home on a beautiful sunny day. I waited at home for him with his son. You need to see a picture of the son. I wish we had it. Beautiful little boy who had been staying with me and his other grandmother. When I saw Nick for the first time, he looked beautiful. He looked and acted like the Nick that we had known before addiction. He told us about his stay in Vegas and was literally shining with hope. He told me, "Mom, I will never go back to that life," and I believed it was possible. That hope began to fade pretty quickly. Nick had started working about 6 weeks before he left for rehab. It had taken him a long time to get that job, and he enjoyed it. and felt that he could actually provide for his family if he could work his way up. However, after rehab, he was unable to secure that job or another job. Nick was going to his scheduled group sessions and going to nightly NA meetings for support. Nick finished up his 6 weeks of group therapy. He was so proud when he received his 60 days clean chip as the NA meeting. 7 days later, he and I spent part of the afternoon together. He wanted to look for a job, and I had some errands to run. He dropped me off where I needed to be and applied for jobs. When I finished, he picked me up and I took him into Sam's Club to show him some cute toys for his son for Christmas. We picked out a racetrack together and I showed him a few other things I had bought for my grandson. I had mentioned that Chris might get his son a basketball hoop for Christmas, and he told me, "No, Mom, I want to buy that for him with my own money." We had a good afternoon together. He had made plans for the evening to meet up with some of his high school friends who were in for the weekend. He left my house around 8 o'clock, and I heard him return around 12:35. All of his friends later said he'd had a good night. He was happy and smiling. There was nothing to indicate that there was anything wrong. Shortly after I heard Nick come home, my grandson's crying woke me up, and I woke to change him and give him a bottle. I headed back to bed and noticed the light on in the bedroom and knocked and opened the door. It was around 1:45 a.m., and Nick was lying on the bathroom floor with no pulse and not breathing. I called 911 and began CPR. Within minutes, the ambulance arrived. They worked on him for some time while I spoke to the police officer. Then they took him out to the ambulance. I assumed they had stabilized him enough to transport him and waited for my in-laws to arrive to watch our grandson. When Chris and I were called back to the emergency room, we did not expect to hear that Nick had passed away. We didn't expect that we would have to call our daughters to tell them that their brother was dead, or that we would sit in a room with him feeling him so cold while we waited for our daughters to arrive from Morgantown. We weren't able to get in touch with our other daughter and had to send my sister over the following morning to tell her the news. We didn't expect that in less than 2 days, we'd be picking out a coffin and cemetery plot for our son. We expected that we would be sending him back to treatment in the hope that the next round would be successful. We expected another chance. And what we have now is the knowledge that we failed our son in the worst way possible. Sincerely, Renee and Chris Fisher. There's a picture that it'd be hard to show because it was the most moving picture I've ever seen. They sent me the picture of Nick, this wonderful young man, lying in a casket, and his little boy tiptoed up holding on. If that doesn't move all of us to do the right thing here and start finding treatment centers and start working with this illness and finding ways to understand, start intervening. You have to intervene at inception, from birth, all the way through, educating children. It is destroying economies, it's destroying families, it's destroying basically communities all over this country. And it is something that I hope that we all can fight. To lose a young man, this was a terrific young man, to lose him to drugs is just uncalled for. I thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.